Hello and welcome to Divine Wisdom Explained, your go-to place for deep insights from the Bible that can transform your life. If you're looking for stories of faith, courage, and God's mighty power, you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with all our upcoming videos. Your support means so much and helps us continue sharing the wisdom of God's Word. Now, let's journey into one of the most powerful stories in the Bible, the Battle of Jericho, faith and strategy. The story of the Battle of Jericho. The Israelites had been wandering in the desert for 40 long years. They had endured hardships, disobedience, and trials, but now they were on the cusp of entering the Promised Land. After Moses' death, Joshua became the leader of the Israelites, and he was tasked with leading them into the land that God had promised to give to them. The first major obstacle that stood in their way was the heavily fortified city of Jericho. Jericho was a city that seemed nearly impenetrable. It was surrounded by massive, thick walls that had withstood countless attacks. But God had already planned a victory for His people. The battle would not be won by military strength or human tactics but by faith and obedience to God's instructions. Joshua's encounter with the commander of the Lord's army. Before the Israelites even began to prepare for battle, Joshua had an extraordinary encounter. One evening, as Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword. Joshua, always ready for a challenge, asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" Joshua 5 verse 13. The man responded, "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua 5 verse 14. Realizing that this was no ordinary man, Joshua fell face down in reverence and asked, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" Joshua 5 verse 14. The commander gave Joshua a message, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua 5 verse 15. This moment was a reminder to Joshua, and to the Israelites, that the battle ahead was not theirs to fight alone. It was the Lord who would lead them into victory, and they were to follow His instructions to the letter. The victory was already secured in God's will. The Israelites just had to trust Him and obey. The Lord's plan for the Battle of Jericho. Once Joshua understood that the battle was the Lord's and not his, God gave him a very unusual strategy for taking the city of Jericho. "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." Joshua 6 verses 2 to 5. At first glance, this plan might have seemed strange. There were no traditional weapons involved. No siege engines. No military tactics. Just a march and the sound of trumpets. But Joshua, fully trusting in God's power, relayed the plan to the Israelites. The Israelites' obedience and faith. The Israelites, now under Joshua's leadership, followed God's instructions exactly as He had commanded. For 6 days, they silently marched around the city once a day with the priests blowing trumpets. On the 7th day they marched around the city 7 times. And after the 7th time, the priests blew a long blast on the trumpets, and Joshua gave the command, "Shout! For the Lord has given you the city." Joshua 6 verse 16. The Israelites obeyed and they shouted with all their might. The moment their voices echoed through the city, the walls of Jericho, which had been standing for centuries, collapsed into the ground. The mighty walls that had protected the city for so long were now no obstacle. The Israelites immediately charged into the city, overtaking it with minimal resistance. Jericho was defeated, not because of military power but because of God's power and the faith and obedience of His people. The fall of Jericho, God's power and provision. The Israelites took Jericho as the Lord had promised, and the city was utterly destroyed. The Bible tells us that Rahab, a prostitute who had hidden the Israelite spies in her home, was spared along with her family because she had helped the spies. Joshua 6 verse 25. This act of kindness and faith in God's plan protected Rahab and her family, and she later became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Matthew 1 verse 5. The Israelites were commanded to devote the city to God. All the silver, gold, and items of value were to be brought into the treasury of the Lord's house. They were not to take anything for themselves. This was a lesson in obedience and trust, showing that God would provide for his people, and they were to honor him with the spoils of war. The morals and lessons from the Battle of Jericho. The story of the Battle of Jericho is rich with spiritual lessons that are still relevant to us today. Here are a few key morals that we can learn from this incredible account. 1. Obedience to God's plan brings victory. The Israelites' success in the Battle of Jericho was directly tied to their obedience to God's commands. The strategy they followed was not their own idea but God's. It seemed unconventional and perhaps even foolish, but it worked because it was God's will. Sometimes, God asks us to do things that don't make sense to our human understanding, but when we obey, we see his miraculous power at work. Obedience to God is often the key to experiencing his blessings and victories in our lives. 2. Faith in God's promises is essential. God had already promised Joshua and the Israelites that Jericho would be theirs, Joshua 6 verse 2. Their job was to trust in his promise, even though they could not see the end result. Faith is the confidence that God will fulfill his word, even when it doesn't seem possible. Just as the Israelites had to trust in God's plan despite the seeming impossibility of conquering Jericho, we too must trust that God's promises are true and that he will come through for us, no matter the obstacles we face. 3. God's power is greater than any obstacle. The walls of Jericho were formidable. They were thick, tall, and had protected the city for years. Yet when God spoke, those walls came tumbling down. The Battle of Jericho teaches us that no matter how insurmountable our problems may seem, God's power is always greater. When we trust in his strength, he can move mountains, literally and figuratively. For God's timing is perfect. The Israelites had to march around the city for 7 days. On the 7th day, after completing the task exactly as God instructed, they experienced victory. This teaches us the importance of God's timing. Sometimes we are eager for things to happen quickly, but God's timing is always perfect. We must be patient and trust that he is working in ways we may not immediately see. 5. The importance of faithful leadership. Joshua's leadership was crucial to the Israelites' success. He faithfully communicated God's instructions to the people and led them with courage and conviction. As leaders in our own lives, whether at home, work, or in our communities, we are called to be faithful in guiding others according to God's word. A leader's faith and obedience to God can inspire others to follow suit and experience victory together. 6. Victory belongs to the Lord. Finally, the story of Jericho shows us that ultimate victory belongs to God. The Israelites didn't win the battle through their military might, strategy, or strength. It was God who caused the walls to fall and led them into victory. We must remember that in our own lives, victory is not ours to claim. It is God's, and he is the one who grants us success in every area of life. Conclusion: trusting God's plan. The Battle of Jericho teaches us that with faith and obedience, even the most impossible situations can be overcome. The walls of Jericho came down not through human strength but through divine intervention. God's power is limitless, and when we trust him, we are able to experience victories that we could never have imagined on our own. The Israelites' victory was a direct result of their faith and trust in God's plan, and we too can face our challenges with the same assurance that God will provide a way when we walk in obedience. Thank you for watching today's video. If the story of Jericho and the lessons from Joshua's faith have inspired you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with those who need to hear it. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our future videos filled with divine wisdom. May God bless you with faith, strength, and victory in every area of your life. Until next time, keep trusting in God's power and his perfect plan for you.